The road to the mansion was overgrown with weeds, the kind that curled around rusting gates like fingers unwilling to let go. Adaeze stood at the threshold, her heart quickening at the sight of the once grand estate. The sign above the entrance, though nearly erased by time, still bore the faint engraving of Nwobi House. To most, it was just another relic of Nigeria's long-forgotten wealth, abandoned after scandals and whispers of betrayal. But to Adaeze, there was a pull, an urge she could not name, that drew her toward it. The heavy gates groaned as she pushed them open, and the compound revealed itself in fragments. Marble stairs cracked by rain, vines climbing the walls, glass windows shattered into jagged teeth. Yet, in the silence of the late afternoon, there lingered a ghost of grandeur. It was as though the mansion refused to surrender its dignity completely. The chandeliers that dangled from the high ceilings, though coated in dust, still sparkled faintly when a ray of sunlight cut through broken shutters. Inside, her footsteps echoed across the cold marble floor, amplifying the emptiness. The air smelled of damp wood, faded perfume, and something else, an ancient sorrow that refused to dissipate. Portraits lined the corridor, their faces half faded, half accusing. Men in agbadas, women draped in lace, children smiling in innocence. Each portrait bore a golden plaque with names she did not recognize, except one, Chike Nwobi, age 6. Adaeze paused, her gaze locked on the boy in the painting. His small face carried a strange sadness even beneath the painted smile. She traced the edge of the frame with trembling fingers, feeling a shiver course through her. This house was alive with memories, and she had stepped into its lungs. Venturing deeper, she discovered rooms left untouched. A dining table set for 12, chairs pushed back as if a meal had been interrupted decades ago. A cracked mirror reflected her silhouette, bending her form like a ghost among ghosts. It felt intrusive, yet irresistible. In one corner of the drawing room, beneath a pile of torn drapes and broken furniture, something caught her eye, a small wooden box. It was not like the others gathering mold and termites. This one gleamed faintly, its edges carved with intricate patterns of roses and initials entwined, M.N. Dust clung to it stubbornly, but even beneath the layers, it radiated importance. Adaeze crouched, brushing off the dust with her scarf. Her heart raced as her fingers found a delicate winding key on the side. She hesitated, glancing around the room as though the walls themselves might protest. Then, slowly, she turned the key. The first notes that escaped were soft, almost reluctant, like a whisper awakening after years of silence. Then, the melody grew, filling the hollow air with a tune so haunting it seemed alive. It was not just music, it was memory-made sound. The rise and fall of the notes carried longing, love, and unbearable sorrow. Adaze's chest tightened, her eyes pricking with tears she could not explain. She closed her eyes, allowing the sound to wash over her. And in that moment she felt something impossible, like someone else was listening through her. Miles away, in a glass skyscraper that dominated Victoria Island, CEO Chike Nwobi stood before a panel of investors. The room was sleek, modern, and suffocating with ambition. Screens displayed projections, charts, and figures climbing into billions. His voice was steady as he spoke of mergers, innovations, and empires yet to be conquered. To the world, he was untouchable, a titan of technology and wealth. But then it happened. Mid-sentence, as he gestured toward a glowing chart, a sound pierced his mind. A melody faint, distant, but undeniable. His throat closed, the words dying on his tongue. The investors shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Chike's eyes widened as the music grew louder inside his head, a sound he had not heard since he was a boy. His chest heaved, memories assaulting him, his mother's soft voice humming the very tune, the smell of her perfume, the warmth of her embrace before she vanished from his life. His hands trembled, his voice cracked. He stumbled backward, knocking over a glass of water. To his board, it looked like a breakdown, a billionaire suddenly crumbling under pressure. But to Chike, it was a shattering of walls he had built for decades. Tears welled unbidden, falling before he could stop them. His assistant, Tola, rushed forward, whispering urgently, "Sir, are you okay? Should we call a doctor?" Chike shook his head violently, unable to explain. The melody would not stop. It wrapped around him, drowning the boardroom chatter, suffocating him in grief. He could not stay. Abruptly, he left the conference, ignoring the startled faces, retreating to the solitude of his office where he collapsed onto a leather chair, his head in his hands. In Ikoyi, Adaeze placed the music box carefully on a dusty table. Her breathing was uneven, her skin tingling as if the air around her had shifted. She could not understand why such a melody carried so much weight, why it felt less like discovery and more like destiny. The notes faded, but their echo lingered in her soul. She touched the carvings again, tracing the initials. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt the music calling not just to her, but beyond her, as though carrying a message across time and distance. And indeed, it was. In Lagos, the titan of industry wept like a child for the first time in decades. In the abandoned mansion, a young woman stood frozen, holding the box that had awakened the grief of a billionaire. Neither knew it yet, but the melody had bound their fates together. Adaeze steadied herself, clutching the box. She felt the music was not done speaking, as if it was leading her toward a truth she did not yet understand. The lights of Lagos glittered like fallen stars outside the glass walls of Chike Nwobi's penthouse. From the rooftop, the Atlantic stretched into darkness, the hum of traffic on Ozumbamba fading beneath the soundproof walls of his fortress in the sky. To the world, Chike was untouchable, the billionaire who had built Nwobi Technologies from the ground up, the man whose ruthlessness in boardrooms made rivals bow and investors worship. But tonight, the image cracked. He sat slumped in a leather armchair, his tie loosened, his perfectly tailored suit now suffocating. His face, usually hard as steel, was wet with tears he could not stop. The haunting melody refused to leave his mind, replaying in loops, each note piercing deeper into the cage he had built around his heart. For years, Chike had mastered silence. He had silenced grief, silenced longing, silenced every whisper of vulnerability. Yet one forgotten tune had shattered his fortress in seconds. Tola, his loyal assistant, paced the room nervously, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. She had followed him from the boardroom chaos, stunned to see him so undone. "Sir," she said gently, her voice trembling. "Should I call Dr. Hassan, or cancel tomorrow's investor briefing?" Chike's jaw tightened. "No doctors, no questions." His voice cracked halfway, betraying him. He turned away, ashamed to be seen. "Just leave me, Tola." "But sir, leave." The finality in his tone silenced her. She lingered by the door, torn between duty and compassion, then obeyed, closing it softly behind her. The silence that followed was unbearable. Alone. Chike leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. His breath came in ragged bursts. And then, almost against his will, he whispered a name into the empty room. "Mother." The word broke him further, crumbling the last defenses of the man Lagos feared. For decades, he had erased her from conversation, even from memory. Her disappearance had been a wound he stitched shut with ambition and wealth, but their melody had ripped the stitches open. He rose abruptly, pacing across the wide expanse of the penthouse. The city lights blinked below, indifferent to his torment. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Eyes red, hands trembling, lips quivering with grief. Images flickered through his mind, like ghosts on broken film reels. A grand staircase in the Ikoyi mansion, his small hands clapping as a woman in Ankara lace bent over him, winding a music box. The sweet sound filling the air as she hummed along, her voice soft and warm, the scent of hibiscus tea on her breath, her laughter, a melody more beautiful than the music itself. Then the silence. The day she was gone, the day the music stopped, Chike pressed his forehead against the glass, gasping. He had buried those memories beneath towers of glass, billions of naira, fleets of cars, private jets. Yet a single tune had destroyed it all. "Why now?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Why after all these years?" But there was no answer. Only the faint echo of the music in his head. While he wrestled with ghosts, the world outside was already shifting. In private WhatsApp groups, investors whispered of his collapse during the meeting. Screenshots of concerned text messages circulated through Lagos's elite circles. Rumors sharpened into weapons. The CEO is losing it. The empire is cracking. In a sleek lounge in Banana Island, rival executives toasted quietly, exchanging smirks. "The lion is limping," one said. "It's time to move in." The vultures circled, but inside his penthouse, Chike knew none of it. He was drowning in his own mind. He tried to push the melody away, tried to suffocate it under logic and control, but it would not die. Instead, it grew louder, stronger, as if demanding he confront what he had buried. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. The shadows of the room seemed to move with the tune, pulling him back to that old house, that lost life. He fought sleep, but eventually the memories dragged him under. In his dream, the mansion stood unbroken. His mother stood on the balcony, smiling, her hands clasped around the very music box. She called his name. "Chike, my son, don't forget the song." Her voice merged with the melody, and the boy he once was ran toward her, desperate to hold on. But before he reached her, the vision dissolved into smoke. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. The music still played in his mind, relentless. Far away, in the abandoned mansion in Ikoyi, Adaeze had also been unable to let go. She sat on a cracked leather armchair, the music box before her, its carvings gleaming faintly in the dusk. Her fingers traced the initials again. There was something sacred about this object, as though it carried lives within it. She wound it once more, letting the melody spill into the emptiness. But this time, something unexpected happened. As the tune played, a faint click echoed beneath the box. Adaeze frowned, lifting it gently. To her surprise, a hidden compartment slid open at the base. Her breath caught. Inside, something waited. Something that had remained hidden for decades, untouched, waiting for the right hands to find it. The secret compartment yawned open in Adaeze's lap, its mystery staring back at her, even as the melody continued to weave its spell between her and the broken billionaire far away. Adaeze's hands trembled as she slid the secret compartment fully open. The sound of the music box filled the dusty air, haunting yet comforting, while inside the hidden space lay a single item, an old, faded photograph. She reached for it cautiously, as though afraid the fragile paper might dissolve in her fingers. It was a portrait, the kind captured in studio lights decades ago. In it, a boy stood beside a regal-looking woman in traditional lace attire. The boy could not have been older than 6, his small frame stiff in a starched shirt, but his eyes were unmistakable, sharp, piercing, carrying an intelligence that felt too large for his age. Even through the fading edges of the photograph, Adaeze recognized that gaze. She had seen it before, not in person but in headlines, business magazines, and giant billboards around Lagos. It was Chike Nwobi. Her breath caught. The name alone carried weight in Nigeria, synonymous with money, ambition, and merciless deals. The boy in the photograph was none other than the billionaire CEO himself, but here, frozen in time, he looked nothing like the ruthless figure of power she knew from newspapers. Here, he looked innocent, vulnerable, still tethered to his mother's side. Adaeze sat back in the armchair, clutching the photo as the melody wound down. Her mind raced. This abandoned mansion wasn't just another ruin, it was the Nwobi family estate. And the music box, carved with initials she now understood to be those of Chike's mother, had once belonged to her as a treasured possession. The thought unsettled her. What business did she, a young woman scraping by with freelance work and odd jobs, have meddling in the affairs of billionaires? This was not her world. Still, the feeling in her chest was undeniable. It wasn't just curiosity, it was responsibility. Something about the photograph and the melody urged her to return the music box, to restore what had been lost. Later that evening, in her small flat in Surulere, Adaeze shared the discovery with her 2 closest friends, Amaka and Ifunanya. They sat around a low table with bowls of steaming jollof rice, the music box resting between them like a sacred relic. "You should leave this matter alone," Amaka warned, shaking her head. "These rich people and their secrets, You'll put yourself in danger. Do you know the kind of enemies they have?" "It's not your fight." Ifunanya leaned closer, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "But don't you see? This is destiny. Maybe you were meant to find it. Maybe it's play, connected to your future." Adaeze frowned, staring at the photograph again. "I don't know what I believe. But when I hear the tune, I feel like it's alive." like it wants to be heard. And this picture, it's him. I'm sure of it. The whole city knows his face. But here he's just a boy, not a billionaire. Amaka folded her arms. And you think he'll thank you for bringing it? Or even believe you? My dear, men like Chike don't trust anyone, especially not strangers. He might think you're trying to scam him. The words stung, but Adaeze knew there was truth in them. She was not naive about power. She had seen how it warped people, how it built walls between the wealthy and the rest of society. Yet, as she looked at the music box, her heart refused to let it go. Something about it felt deeply personal, as though fate had deliberately placed it in her path. That night, she placed the music box on her bedside table and tried to sleep. But instead of rest, she dreamed. In her dream, she was a child again, running through wide marble halls lit with golden light. A woman hummed a tune nearby, the same haunting melody. Adaeze followed the sound, only to find the boy from the photograph sitting on the stairs, tears streaming down his face. When she reached out to comfort him, the dream dissolved into darkness. She woke with her heart pounding, the music still echoing in her ears. Meanwhile, in his penthouse across the city, Chike was also haunted by dreams. Each night, his mother appeared, her voice carrying the tune as she leaned over him, whispering promises of love that never came true. He would wake drenched in sweat, clutching at the sheets like a boy again. In the morning, his empire continued to quake under his absence. Stock prices dipped, investors demanded clarity, and whispers spread that the CEO had lost his edge. Chike ignored their calls. His phone buzzed endlessly on his desk, but he sat staring at the skyline, consumed by memories. For a man who had conquered every battle in business, he now found himself powerless against a song. The two worlds, Adaeze's modest life and Chike's empire of glass, seemed impossibly far apart, yet the melody was already stitching them together. By the following week, Adaeze made her decision. The photograph burned in her pocket every time she touched it, and the music box seemed to hum with unseen urgency. She could not stay idle. Perhaps Amaka was right. Perhaps it was dangerous, but something in her spirit refused to let her bury the discovery. On a bright Lagos morning, she packed the music box into a protective cloth, placed the photograph safely inside her bag, and boarded a bus heading toward Victoria Island. She gazed out the window as the city whirled past the crowded markets of Ojuelegba, the traffic snarls of Third Mainland Bridge, the ocean breeze growing stronger as she neared the island. She did not know what awaited her at the gates of Chike Nwobi's empire. She only knew she had to return the music, no matter the cost. With the music box in hand and the faded photograph pressed close to her heart, Adaeze set her course for Victoria Island, unaware that her steps were leading her straight into the storm of a billionaire's unraveling life. The journey from Surulere to Victoria Island felt like crossing into another world. Adaeze had boarded a Danfo bus before dawn, her bag clutched tightly against her chest. Inside it, wrapped in layers of cloth, was the music box, the object that had filled her nights with restless dreams and her days with questions. The photograph of the boy and his mother was tucked safely inside her pocket. She kept touching it, as if to reassure herself that it was still real. As the bus rumbled past the glistening waters of the lagoon, the skyline of Victoria Island rose before her like a promise and a threat. Glass towers shimmered in the morning light, and luxury cars sped past on wide boulevards. This was not in her world, but today she had no choice but to step into it. When the bus stopped near Eco Atlantic, Adaeze stepped down, her heart pounding. She hailed a keke that carried her closer to the neighborhood where billionaires built their fortresses. The mansion came into view gradually, a massive structure of steel and glass, rising with a kind of arrogance against the sky. Its gates were tall and black, guarded by uniformed men who looked more like soldiers than security. Cameras turned silently, tracking every movement. Adaeze swallowed hard. She adjusted her scarf and approached the gate, summoning courage she wasn't sure she possessed. "Good morning," she began softly, her voice steady but polite. "Please, I've come to see Chief Executive Officer Chike Nwobi. I have something for him." The guard nearest her raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching into a half-smirk. "And who are you?" "My name is Adaeze," she replied. "It's important. He must see me." The guard exchanged glances with his partner. "Do you know how many people show up here every week claiming they must see him? If we opened these gates for all of you, the whole of Lagos would be inside." Adaeze's cheeks burned. I am not just anyone, I have something that belongs to him. She carefully unwrapped a corner of the cloth, revealing the carved music box. The laughter died instantly. The guards stiffened, curiosity flashing in their eyes. Still, their training kept them cold. Madam, you can't just walk into Mr. Nwobi's home with antiques. Please, leave before you embarrass yourself further. Their tone was dismissive, almost humiliating, and Adaeze felt anger rise within her. She tightened her grip on the music box, ready to argue again, when movement above caught her eye. On the mansion's upper balcony, behind tinted glass, Chike Nwobi himself stood watching. He had been restless all morning, unable to shake the residue of the dreams that had tormented him for nights. Drawn by some force, he had stepped onto the balcony just in time to see a young woman at his gates, holding something in her arms. At first, he thought it was another desperate stranger seeking attention, but when the morning sun caught the object, he froze. Even at that distance, even with decades of separation, he recognized it. The carvings, the shape, the very soul of the object, the music box. His breath caught, and the world around him blurred. He gripped the railing, his chest tightening as memories surged. It was impossible. That box had been lost long ago, sealed away in the shadows of his past. How could it appear now, in the hands of this stranger? Bring her inside, he commanded hoarsely into the intercom system. Down at the gate, the guards stiffened, confused by the sudden order. But they obeyed. The gates creaked open, and Adaeze, bewildered, stepped into the sprawling compound. The manicured lawns stretched wide, fountains sparkled in the sun, and luxury cars lined the driveway like gleaming predators. Every step she took felt heavier, as if the ground itself knew she was trespassing into a world of immense power. She was escorted into the main hall, where silence wrapped around marble floors and towering glass walls. Chike descended the staircase slowly, his eyes locked on the box in her hands. For the first time, Adaeze saw him not as a photograph, not as a headline, but as a living presence, commanding, sharp, intimidating. He wore a simple white shirt, yet his aura filled the room like thunderclouds. "Who are you?" His voice was low, guarded. Adaeze swallowed, steadying herself. "My name is Adaeze. I found this in the old mansion in Ikoyi. I thought it belongs to you." She lifted the box slightly, as though presenting it to him. Chike's eyes flickered with something raw: fear, disbelief, longing. But he quickly masked it with suspicion. "And why would you bring it here? Do you think you can manipulate me with relics from my past? People have tried before, you know. Blackmail, scams, lies." His words cut, but Adaeze stood her ground. "I'm not here for money, Mr. Nwobi. I didn't come to take anything from you. This box, it wanted to be returned. That's all." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, Chike scoffed and turned away, trying to dismiss her. "Take it and go. I don't need reminders of ghosts." But just as Adaeze lowered her eyes, hurt by his rejection, the faint sound of the melody filled the hall. She had unknowingly brushed the winding key, and the tune began to play once more. Chike froze mid-step. The first notes struck him like lightning. His knees weakened. He turned back, his face pale, his eyes glistening. The music grew, wrapping around the cold air, filling the mansion with the voice of his mother's love. He could not move. He could not breathe. Adaeze watched him, startled by the transformation. The man who only moments ago had spoken like steel was now unraveling before her eyes. "Stop it," he whispered, but his voice broke. He covered his face with one hand, as though shielding himself from the melody. Yet he could not turn away. In that moment, Adaeze understood this box was no mere object. It was the thread pulling open wounds buried deep within him. When the music faded, silence returned heavier than before. Chike lifted his head slowly, his expression torn between rage and vulnerability. His voice came low, trembling with something she could not name. "Tell me," he demanded, stepping closer, his eyes burning into hers. His voice cracked on the question, trembling with a desperation that left Adaeze shaken. The music box pulsed between them, carrying a truth that could no longer stay buried. The long dining table stretched like a runway of polished mahogany, its surface gleaming beneath the light of a grand chandelier. Plates of steaming food had been laid, out-grilled fish, pepper soup, pounded yam, jollof rice, fragrant with spices, yet the atmosphere was anything but warm. At one end sat Chike Nwobi, shoulders squared, his every movement deliberate, his face carved in suspicion. At the other end sat Adaeze, clutching the hem of her dress nervously but refusing to show fear. The silence between them was sharp, broken only by the faint clinking of cutlery and the low hum of the air conditioner. But underneath it all, almost too soft to notice, the music box played faintly from a side table, its melody slipping into the room like smoke. Chike leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "So," he began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, "you just happened to wander into an abandoned mansion and discover the one object that has haunted my entire life. And instead of selling it, you decided to bring it directly to me. Do you know how many lies I've heard in this city?" Adaeze inhaled deeply, steadying her voice. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Nwobi. Not your money, not your influence. I only wanted to return something that was clearly important, that's all." He narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "No one does anything for free, not here, not in Lagos." Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Maybe not in Lagos, but not everyone is looking for profit. Some of us just feel called." Chike scoffed, though the sound lacked conviction. He picked up his fork, stabbed at the fish before him, then set it back down untouched. "Do you have any idea what this box represents? Do you have any idea what you've brought into my house?" Adaeze met his gaze calmly. "No. But I know what it did when I wound it. I know how it made me feel. And I saw how it made you feel too. So maybe the real question is, what does it represent to you?" The challenge in her voice unsettled him. For years, no one had dared confront his emotions, not his staff, not his board, not even women who had passed through his life like shadows. Yet here was this stranger, unafraid to point at the cracks in his armor. His chest tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. His eyes flicked to the music box on the side table, its tune carrying softly into the silence. The melody stirred ghosts he had locked away, and under Adaeze's gaze, the weight pressed harder. "Why would a song make me collapse in front of my board?" His tone was sharp, defensive. "Why should something so simple hold power over me?" Adaeze leaned forward slightly, her voice gentler now. "Because it isn't simple. It's memory. It's love. It's loss. Songs don't just play notes, they carry pieces of us. That's why it broke you." The words struck him deeper than he wanted to admit. He turned his face away, staring at the empty end of the long table. For all his wealth, the room suddenly felt cavernous, echoing with loneliness. Paintings lined the walls, modern art, expensive and bold, but none of them bore family faces. No portraits of warmth, no signs of belonging, just wealth wrapped in silence. Adaeze noticed it all, the untouched wings of the mansion, the sterile perfection, the absence of laughter, of life. "You live in a palace," she said softly, "but it feels like a tomb." Chike's head snapped back toward her, his jaw tightening. No one spoke to him that way. And yet, her eyes carried no malice, only truth. It disarmed him more than any insult could. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. For the first time in years, he felt the urge to speak honestly. "When I was a boy, that melody was my world. My mother used to hum it every night before bed. The music box was hers. When she disappeared, it was like everything vanished. The tune, the warmth, the love. I buried it all. I built walls so high nothing could touch me again. Until you came with that box." His voice broke at the end, and he quickly cleared his throat, ashamed of his own vulnerability. But Adaeze saw it, the boy hidden beneath the billionaire. She placed her spoon down gently. "I grew up not far from that mansion," she confessed. "We weren't rich. My parents worked hard just to feed us. But I used to walk past those gates and wonder what kind of life the people inside lived. To me, it was a palace. I never imagined it was filled with sorrow, too." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, the air shifted. Chike felt a strange lightness, a rare sensation of being understood, not pitied, not judged, seen, truly seen. For years he had filled the silence of his life with business deals, noise, and wealth. Yet here sat a stranger who, with a few words, pierced through it all. He studied her face, her composure, her refusal to cower before him. She was different, and something about that difference unsettled and intrigued him at once. The chandelier above flickered briefly, as if the house itself held its breath. The music box tune reached its final notes before winding down, leaving silence that felt louder than before. Chike leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, he spoke. "You're bold, Adaeze. Bold enough to walk into my world and speak truths others wouldn't dare. I don't know if you're reckless, or exactly what I need." Her brow furrowed slightly, uncertain where he was heading. Then he made his move. "Stay here, work with me. There's more in that mansion, more in my past, that I've ignored for too long. If you've found the box, maybe you're meant to find the rest. I want you in my house." Adaeze's eyes widened. Shock mingled with suspicion. She hadn't expected this, an invitation, a demand, a test. His words lingered in the grand hall like a challenge. "Stay here, work with me." The offer was bold, the risk enormous. For Adaeze, it could change everything, or destroy her completely. Adaeze did not answer immediately. The invitation rang in her ears, long after the plates were cleared and the chandelier dimmed to a twilight shimmer. She paced the guest suite he had assigned her for the night, brushing fingertips along velvet drapes, staring at the city pulsing beyond the windows. Stay and work with him? It felt insane, yet the melody threaded through her doubt, a small courage humming under her ribs. By dawn, she knocked on his study door, heart hammering, and whispered the words that would change everything. She would accept, but on her terms, no manipulation, no pretenses, the truth wherever it could be found. He didn't smile, but something in his shoulders softened. Contracts were not drawn. Instead, an arrangement was spoken over espresso and morning light. She would serve as his personal archivist, gain access to storage vaults, off-site apartments, the Ikoyi estate, and the labyrinthine basements beneath this mansion. Her task was simple in title and immense in weight: catalog everything that carried memory, trace provenance, preserve the pulse of a life he had smothered with success. He assigned 2 assistants, a driver, and a secure workspace that smelled of cedar and old paper. In the glass-walled office that crowned the house like a lighthouse, Adaeze saw the contradiction of Chike's world. Lagos glittered in the distance. Eco-Atlantic's geometric bravado, the endless tide. The ribbons of traffic laced with impatience. Inside, screens mapped markets in real time, numbers rising and plunging like tides. Yet stacked in a corner, sat cardboard crates labeled in scrawled childhood handwriting. Chike stood between the 2 realities, a man calibrated for conquest who had misplaced his origin story. When he spoke about quarterly projections, his voice was titanium. When he asked whether a scuffed photograph should be flattened or framed, it was almost shy. The music box never stayed far. By some unspoken agreement, they set it on a shelf above the cataloging table, and at night, when the office was a greater night raft floating on the city's electric sea, one of them would wind it. The melody braided with the rustle of papers and the click of scanners, turning archiving into ritual. There were moments the tune slowed Chike's breathing, loosening knots he had mistaken for personality. There were moments it made Adaeze ache with a grief that didn't belong to her and yet somehow did, as if the house, the city, the box, and the past were composing a single, patient chord. Sparks surfaced in small accidents. Once, their hands collided over a stack of Polaroids, and the brush felt like static under skin. Another time, he removed his cufflinks and rolled his sleeves without noticing her watching, and she realized how rarely she'd seen him human, unarmored, simply a man at a desk at midnight. He kept his distance with clipped sentences and impeccable manners, but warmth leaked from the places he couldn't patrol. A half smile when she correctly dated an image from the pattern of a wallpaper. The way he said her name like a decision he hadn't meant to make. Downstairs, the staff noticed. Whispered summaries traveled the corridor like harmattan dust. The CEO's new archivist, the girl who came with a box and stayed with a keycard, the late-night lights in the high office, the sound of music where spreadsheets used to reign. Some were curious, some suspicious, a few quietly protective of the guarded man they served. Tola watched the shifts with professional calm, her eyes flicking from Adaeze to Chike and back again, weighing risk and possibility like columns on a ledger. She offered help, but also distance, as if sensing the work was intimate, almost sacred. Beyond the gates, rivals scented turbulence. Analysts muttered about distraction, about a founder tethered to nostalgia rather than margins. Anonymous notes reached the board suggesting that the company's visionary had grown erratic. Invitations arrived for events where smiles were daggers, where hands lingered too, long in false solidarity. Chike, once the center of every room, began declining appearances, choosing nights with ledgers of memory over nights with men who traded loyalty like currency. The markets flickered with doubt, and then steadied, unsure whether to bet on his unraveling or his reinvention. For Chike, emotion arrived like weather he could not command. He told himself attraction was a rumor, nothing more, that gratitude was a weakness measured in lost deals, that longing was a story for poorer men. Still, he caught himself waiting for the sound of her footsteps, adjusting meetings to keep the evenings clear, measuring days by the pages they catalogued. He wrestled nightly with the vow that had built his empire never need anyone, while the music box pressed its small rebellion against that creed, whispering that the past was not an enemy but an axis. Adaeze navigated the mansion like a cartographer drawing a new coastline. She opened trunks breathing camphor, unscrewed frames to free brittle certificates, numbered drawers of silk scarves still scented with forgotten summers. She interviewed housekeepers who remembered the mansion before silence, noting how their stories veered around certain years as if skirting a crater. With every item she catalogued, she felt herself stepping closer to a threshold she could not name. The house responded to her touch. Lights steadied, hinges loosened, corridors exhaled the smell of polish and rain. Behind it waited an entire hidden room, sealed for decades, untouched. Adaeze found the door by tracing a draft along the corridor, a hush where the plaster refused to lie. The seam was hair-thin, painted the color of the wall, sealed by a bolt sunk decades deep. She called Chike to the landing and touched the hidden outline with a reverent finger. He went still, as if an old animal in him had scented a trap. "Not that room," he said, voice ironed flat. She met the refusal with calm persistence, reminding him he had hired her to find what memory concealed, not to decorate its cage. The music box on the trolley glimmered between them, quiet but present, the lighthouse of their uneasy voyage. At last, with a breath that sounded like surrender, he sent for tools. The bolt shrieked, dust lifted in slow spirals. When the door swung inward, cool air spilled out, tasting of cedar, paper, and years that hadn't breathed. Light from the corridor fell across a room held in amber, a child's cane chair perched by the window, its woven seat imprinted with tiny crescents from restless feet. Wooden blocks lay toppled beneath a shelf of picture books, their spines faded to friendly ghosts. A miniature drum sat beside a toy train whose tracks circled a rug patterned like seas. On the far wall, a constellation of family portraits glowed under glass. Birthdays, beach days, a boy with gap-toothed laughter riding his father's shoulders while a woman clapped from the frame's edge. In the corner, a dressmaker's mannequin wore a half-pinned aso-oke wrapper, pins still biting the cloth like held breath. Nothing here was broken, it had simply paused. Dust settled on everything with the tender weight of ash, forgiving and unjudging. Chike hovered on the threshold, his eyes roaming like hands that didn't dare touch. Adaeze rolled the trolley to a low cabinet, its knobs shaped like flowers. A pale circle on the cabinet's top exposed clean wood amid patina, the exact diameter of the music box. Here, its feet had once rested for years, turning longing into lullabies. She lifted the box onto the circle, as if returning a crown to its cushion. The mechanism gave a soft, consenting click. When she wound it, the melody rose into the room and seemed to recognize the walls, gathering warmth, rounding corners, dissolving cobwebs with memory's light. Chike's breath went ragged. He reached for the back of the child's chair and missed, steadying himself against the window frame instead. His armor did not crack. It slid off like a coat he could no longer justify wearing. The businessman receded, and a boy blinked through, startled to find the sun exactly where he had left it. "He locked it," Adaeze said softly, reading the room's silence like print. Chike nodded once, the gesture small and heavy. "After she left," he murmured, "I told the workers to seal it. I thought if I trapped the light, the shadows couldn't chase me. I filled my days with noise until the quiet couldn't find me. He stepped inside at last, the soles of his shoes whispering across the rug. Adaeze handed him linen gloves, and together they began. She passed him a tin of marbles. He opened it and laughed quick, bewildered when one skittered away like a tiny comet. She brushed dust from a kite tail, smoothed a torn book jacket, labeled a stack of watercolor paintings signed with a child's tentative surname. She asked no questions that punished. Her curiosity held room for grief without sharpening it into blame. They worked side by side for hours, building an atlas of a household that had once navigated joy and storm. Receipts for choir donations were tucked beside recital programs where a woman's name appeared as patron, not guest. A bank passbook spoke in small, disciplined deposits that kept tutors paid when seasons turned lean. In a biscuit tin they found ticket stubs to Bar Beach and a scribbled budget mapping school fees against groceries, kerosene, and fabric saved for Christmas. Sacrifice wasn't a myth here. It wore handwriting and careful math. Chike traced the ink with humbled fingers, realizing the empire he built had started as courage counted in Naira notes. Adaeze catalogued each artifact with steady reverence, and every so often their shoulders touched, a wordless bridge. The air throbbed with tenderness, not performance, as if the room were teaching them how to breathe. Near dusk, the windows blushed, and the room loosened its guard. Chike lifted a paper crown cut from wrapping and set it on his head, absurd and regal. Adaeze laughed, and he laughed back, not the brittle bark of meetings but something boyish and round. The smile surprised him so much he touched it, as if confirming it belonged. He opened a music workbook covered in stickers and hummed a shy harmony under the box's refrain. For the first time in years, relief tugged at the corners of his mouth and stayed. While he measured a child's growth pencil marked on the doorframe, Adaeze knelt at an old writing desk, coaxing a stubborn drawer to slide. Its base rattled. She pried at a warped groove, felt a panel shift, and found a narrow cavity pressed flat against the wood. Inside, wrapped in fabric, lay a hidden journal. Adaeze's breath stalled. She looked up, whispering his name, as brittle page edges flickered like wings, promising truths unopened inside. They moved to the sitting area beside the window, where late light pooled like honey across the carpet. The journal rested between them, its fabric wrap worn smooth by time, corners burnished by the kind of handling that comes from love rather than habit. Adaeze untied the ribbon with careful fingers and opened to the first page. In a neat hand, inked in a brown that had mellowed with years, a name appeared, his mother's, followed by a date and a small treble clef sketched in the margin, as if music had been her signature. Chike's throat tightened. He slipped on the linen gloves again and turned the page. "Listen," he said, and read aloud. His voice, usually the instrument of certainty, wavered. "Today, the house is too quiet. I played our song to fill the spaces." Chike clapped along with 2 beats late, but he laughed like a bell, and the house remembered joy. He stopped, swallowing, then kept going. "I want him to know a world where music is not a luxury, where rooms do not swallow children whole." The entries unfolded with the intimacy of after-midnight conversations. His mother wrote of practicing scales when everyone slept, of saving for lessons others called frivolous, of coaxing melody from a cheap keyboard that buzzed at the edges. She wrote of Lagos the way a conductor writes a score, its markets percussive, traffic lines like staves, the ocean a low bass that held the city together. She described a boy who could not pass a drum without striking it, who hummed before he spoke, who pressed his ear to the music box as if learning a secret language. "Here," Adaeze whispered, pointing to a page annotated with tiny budgets. "School fees, fuel, rice, kerosene, music teacher." The last line had been circled twice. "She kept music even when money said she shouldn't," Adaeze said softly. Chike nodded, eyes clouded with a grief that now felt braided with pride. He read on, voice gathering and breaking in waves. "Tradition asks me to quiet myself, to choose silence for the sake of appearances. But silence is a kind of untruth. I want my son to inherit a spine that bends to compassion, not to fear." Another entry sketched the pull between expectation and desire. Aunties who clucked that a proper home required certain performances, uncles who measured worth in land and deference, neighbors who mistrusted ambition in a woman who wore both gele and headphones. Yet she wrote with no bitterness. Her sentences lifted like a hymn, insisting that love could carry its own authority. If I must choose between dignity defined by others and dignity found in truth, I choose the truth that sings, she wrote. Chike pressed the page to still the tremor in his hand. He paused at a spread where a clipping had been pasted, an advert for a youth concert, edges browned by glue. Beneath it, his mother had written, "He will stand on a stage one day, not because a stage makes him worthy, but because he is worthy, and the stage will simply notice." The prophecy landed in him with a thud. He thought of the stages he had built in glass and silicon, platforms for code and capital, and saw, suddenly, the small boy beneath the architecture, the promise that had preceded the prophets. Adaeze listened as if drinking, her attention steady, unembarrassed by his unspooling. She realized that the man before her, the one whose name opened boardroom doors and tightened spines, had been carrying a silence that didn't belong to him. His coldness, she saw now, was not cruelty but insulation. His ambition, a fortress constructed against nights like the ones described here, when candles guttered and fear crept under locked doors. The journal did not excuse him. It explained him, and explanation is often a wider mercy than apology. They turned to a page where his mother listed the things she wanted her son to learn that did not fit in school timetables. How to sit with a friend's sorrow without fixing it. How to say "I was wrong" before power taught him to say "it never." How to build a table longer than his appetite. Chike laughed through wet eyes. "She knew me before I chose my armor," he said. Adaeze touched the margin lightly, as if blessing it. "Maybe she's still choosing for you," she replied. Outside, the city shifted into evening, generators thudding to life, the sky smudging from coral to ink. Inside, the music box sang again, unasked, as if echoing the lines that followed. "If the house forgets our song, we will teach it again. If the world forgets his softness, we will teach it again." Chike closed his eyes and let the melody thread through his ribs. When he looked up, his face had altered in a way ambition could not engineer, less guarded, more legible, a man considering the distance between power and peace. He read a final entry, voice a whisper. "I want him to be the kind of man who can hold both a contract and a lullaby without dropping either." The sentence struck like a tuning fork. He realized, with quiet astonishment, that his relentless ascent had always been an answer to fear, not a pursuit of joy. The empire was real. The armor was realer. But under the weight of his mother's handwriting, the calculus changed. He could build differently. He could lead without erasing the boy who clapped 2 beats late and laughed anyway. For Adaeze, the journal was confirmation rather than surprise. She had trusted the music box without logic. Now the pages gave that trust a face. The decision to walk into danger at his gate no longer felt reckless. It felt aligned. She saw how the city had made both of them her, shaped by scarcity's tenderness, him by abundance's loneliness, and how the melody braided those histories into possibility. The space between them warmed, not with haste but with recognition. They closed the journal and sat in the hush that honest words leave behind. No promises were spoken, yet a pact formed. To let the past be instruction, not imprisonment. To allow gentleness a seat at the same table as strategy. When Chike smiled, it was not a performance for shareholders but a private relief. "I think I know the kind of man I want to be," he said. "And it's not the one I've been rehearsing." Adaeze's answering look held pride she didn't try to hide. The bond between them, forged by pages and melody, felt unbreakable. But beyond the glass, Lagos kept score with a different ledger. As night thickened, rivals traced his absence from the circuit, drafted memos dressed as concern, convened dinners where the menu read opportunity. In boardrooms that smelled of cologne and conquest, strategies sharpened, and plans clicked into place. Eager to turn private tenderness into public weakness, the boardroom of Nwobi Technologies was an arena dressed in glass and chrome. The table stretched endlessly, polished to mirror the restless faces leaning over it. Behind the wall of windows, Lagos shimmered in noonlight commerce, chaos, ambition, all in motion. But inside, silence crackled like dry leaves. The executives, men and women in finely tailored suits, waited with sharpened questions hidden behind their smiles. They had been circling for weeks, watching their lion limp, smelling the possibility of blood in the water. Chike walked in last, not hurried, not apologetic. His dark suit fit like armor, but his eyes held something new, not just calculation, but clarity. He carried no briefcase, no stack of figures, just the quiet assurance of a man who had finally faced himself. Adaeze followed at a distance, seated along the side as an observer. To the board, she was an unknown variable, a reminder of rumors that whispered through the city. The CEO distracted by a woman, entangled in nostalgia instead of strategy. The meeting opened with rehearsed politeness. The CFO cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Sir, the numbers remain strong, but investor confidence is wavering. There are murmurs, concerns about your recent absence from public engagements, your retreat from critical negotiations. Some are beginning to wonder if your personal affairs are interfering with the company's focus." Another executive, lips painted in corporate venom, leaned forward. "Competitors are moving aggressively into our markets, yet our leader is nowhere to be seen. The board needs assurance that Nwobi Technologies is not in danger of losing its crown because its king has chosen to step away." Murmurs rippled, sharp and unkind. The word takeover hovered unspoken, thickening the air. Stockholders had been pressing for answers, their faith shaken by reports of his collapse weeks earlier. Whispers outside the walls said vultures had already drawn their circles. Chike listened, hands folded, face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, carrying the weight of someone who had measured fear and decided to move beyond it. "You think I've been absent because I am weak. You think my silence is negligence. You are wrong. I have been silent because I have been listening." The words unsettled the room. Executives shifted, exchanging wary glances. "I built this empire with precision," Chike continued. "I know the language of profit and power better than anyone here, but an empire without vision is nothing but scaffolding. You ask why I stepped back? Because I remembered something all of us risk forgetting, that companies are not numbers, they are legacies, they are lives." A scoff rose from the far end of the table. "Legacy doesn't pay dividends, sir. Investors want growth, not poetry." Chike's eyes sharpened, but his smile was calm. "Growth without soul is empty. It collapses under its own weight. What keeps this company alive isn't just the revenue, it's the belief that we are building something larger than ourselves. That is why people buy from us. That is why people invest. Not for my face on a magazine cover, but because they believe we stand for more than margins." Adaeze sat quietly, her gaze steady on him. She saw the truth unfolding. The journal, the music box, his rediscovery of roots, all of it now poured into his words. His vulnerability, once his greatest fear, had become his sharpest weapon. He leaned forward, his voice gaining fire. "Yes, I stepped away. Not because I lost control, but because I found clarity. My mother once taught me that strength without compassion is brittle, that silence breeds decay. I will not lead this company into silence. I will lead it into vision, into building platforms that do not just sell products, but preserve culture, elevate communities, and redefine what Nigerian innovation means. That is my legacy. That is this company's future." The room trembled under the force of his conviction. Rivals who had expected him to fold, to cower, found themselves recoiling. Their plans to corner him began to feel premature, flimsy against the raw surge of his belief. An older board member, usually neutral, leaned back and murmured, "For the first time in years, I hear a leader again." Chike stood, breaking protocol, walking the length of the table as he spoke. "If any of you believe Nwobi Technologies has no future under my leadership, you are free to step aside. Sell your shares. Leave the table. But if you remain, know this: our path forward will not be fear, it will be courage, and it will be rooted in who we are." The room was silent. Even those who had sharpened knives earlier now found themselves unsteady, the steel in his words reflecting their own doubts back at them. Adaeze felt a shiver as she watched. This was not just the billionaire of headlines. This was the man his mother had imagined in her journal, the one who could hold both a contract and a lullaby. The meeting adjourned with no talk of takeover. The board left shaken, half reluctant, half inspired. Whispers of rebellion dulled, replaced by a wary respect. For now, Chike had reclaimed the battlefield, not with lawyers or courts, but with vision. When the room emptied, Chike remained by the glass wall, staring at the skyline. The city pulsed below, but his gaze was far away. Adaeze approached quietly, standing beside him. "You were brilliant," she said softly. He did not smile. His reflection in the glass was sharp, almost haunted. "Brilliance doesn't scare me," he murmured. What scares me is you. Adaeze blinked, startled. Me? He turned then, his eyes raw in a way that stripped the title CEO from him, leaving only the man. I've faced rivals, losses, betrayals. I've fought storms and built walls high enough to keep everything out. But you make me feel again, and I don't know if I can survive losing that, losing you, more than I fear losing all of this. His confession hung in the air, heavier than any corporate storm. For Adaeze, the question was no longer about business or legacy, it was about whether her heart was ready to carry the weight of a man who feared love more than failure. Nights spread over Lagos like a velvet shawl, stitched with headlights and the red blink of cranes on Eco-Atlantic. From the penthouse terrace, the city looked endless, a lattice of possibility and exhaustion. Chike and Adaeze sat on a low bench near the glass, a blanket around their shoulders against the ocean breeze. Inside, the house slept. Outside, generators hummed like distant drums. Between them, on the small table, the music box waited, its carvings catching stray splinters of light. They were close enough to share breath, far enough to remember the danger. The hour invited confessions, and both had run out of places to hide. Chike spoke first, not with the certainty that dominated his meetings, but with a quiet fear he could no longer camouflage. He said he had grown used to the echo of his own footsteps, the way the elevator doors whispered open to emptiness, the taste of dinners eaten standing, the ache of victories no one witnessed. He confessed he had built routines like barricades, cold showers at dawn, a gym session that punished, calendars stacked to erase unscheduled emotions. When the melody returned, it had cut through those defenses like monsoon rain through dry earth, and he had been terrified by the softness flooding back. He spoke of guilt, too, the kind that sits under the sternum like a hidden stone. If he had looked harder, listened better, loved his mother more bravely, would she have stayed? The question haunted every promotion, every building, every car, every speech. He said he feared the music because it remembered the boy he abandoned to become the man the world demanded. He feared, most of all, discovering that success had been purchased with the currency of forgetting. The city glittered beneath them, as if eavesdropping, as if measuring him anew. When he stopped, he looked smaller and somehow more complete. Adaeze answered with the honesty of someone who has never been allowed illusions. She told him about evenings when Nipa took the light and her mother read by phone torch, about counting coins for transport, about patching shoes until the street finally claimed them. She told him about refusing pity, about choosing clean pride over performative hunger, about the comfort of neighbors who shared salt and laughter. She said she had learned to find music in ordinary places, the clatter of spoons on enamel, market women harmonizing prices, the ocean arguing with the breakwater. Poverty had taught her tenderness, not bitterness. The distance between their biographies should have been a wall. Instead, it became a bridge. He reached for the music box and wound it once, just enough for the melody to float like a lantern above their heads. They sat in silence as it threaded their histories together, the notes stitching rich to poor, glass to concrete, throne room to kitchen. Chike said he did not know how to love without controlling, how to give without tallying. Adaeze said she did not know how to receive without suspicion, how to rest without apology. The city wind tugged at the blanket, and they drew closer. "I am afraid of you," he said, almost laughing at himself. "Not because you will hurt me, but because you might unmake me. What if the man I built cannot survive being known?" She studied his face, its architecture softened by the hour. "Then let the man you were meant to be arrive," she replied. "Not the performance, the person." He looked away, blinking hard. The melody faltered and resumed, as if agreeing. He told her she had become the only quiet in his day. She admitted she checked the office lights each night, hoping he was still awake. Vulnerability altered his posture. He leaned closer, elbows on knees, fingers interlaced as if in prayer. He spoke of the fear that intimacy would slow him, blunt his edge, cost him the empire he had promised himself to guard. She countered that sharpness without softness cuts the hand that wields it. He asked who would protect her from the gravity of his life. She said she would anchor herself, with work, with truth, with the ordinary rituals that refused to be dazzled. The music softened, and in the hush their shoulders touched. The contact small and absolute, they turned toward each other at the same time, laughter catching on their lips, gravity replacing courage. He lifted a hand but stopped, asking with his eyes. She answered by not looking away. The city brightened under a passing aircraft, a slow glint sliding over glass. He whispered her name like a promise broken gently. She spoke his like a key. Their breath met first, then the space between them thinned until it trembled. The almost kiss hovered, fragile as the first note of a hymn, and then the phone on the table began to vibrate, insistent, merciless, shrill. Chike stared at the screen, betrayed. The caller ID carried the weight of the board. A crisis notification scrolled across. An activist shareholder had called an emergency vote, rumors of an acquisition fund poising to strike by morning. He stood, apology written all over his shadow. "I have to take this," he said, and the sentence felt like a door closing. She nodded, pulling the blanket around herself as if dressing in patience. The music box kept playing. He paced, listening, already choosing between love and the empire tonight. Dawn arrived with a slate blue sky and a calendar stacked like a barricade. Chike stood at the window, phone hot against his ear, while the city unraveled into traffic and heat. The deal on the table was volcanic, a merger that would double market reach and drown competitors, or, if misstepped, fracture everything he had built. Advisors fed him numbers, scenarios, and language shaped like inevitability. Beneath their urgency, the music box's phantom melody threaded his thoughts, lifting lines from his mother's journal. Build a table longer than your appetite. Hold a lullaby and a contract without dropping either. Adaeze moved through the penthouse like quiet weather, gathering notes and archival summaries he had asked for at midnight, then not touched. She understood the weight of this day, the one that would crown or unmake his empire, but felt herself pushed to the corridor's edge. He thanked her without meeting her eyes, and the distance stung, a clean ache she refused to name resentment. She reminded herself that love did not require center stage to be true. Yet when the elevator doors closed on him, she had to steady her breathing, feeling the old fear of being left outside powerful rooms. By mid-morning, the boardroom swelled with significance. Screens bloomed with graphs, market maps, and the gloved handshake of a future everyone expected to be sterile and profitable. Rivals wore courtesy like perfume. Loyalists guarded silence. Cameras in the ceiling blinked. Chike took his seat at the head, palms flat on wood, spine aligned by a decision forming beyond spreadsheets. A director cleared his throat and presented the merger as if it were weather, not strategy. Another touted efficiency synergies, a phrase that washed the blood from cost-cutting. They looked to Chike to bless it and clip the ribbon. Instead, he asked for the lights to dim and the window shades to rise. Lagos flooded the room. Cranes pinpricked the horizon. The Atlantic kept its patient bass. Street hawkers stitched colors into traffic. "I have listened to all your models," he said, voice calm. "And I've run them myself. They succeed at profit. They fail at purpose. We will not sign this merger as written." The sentence landed like a thrown stone. A cluster of executives recoiled, calculating how quickly power can pivot. The CFO recovered first, reminding him of shareholder obligations, the punitive speed of markets, the danger of sentimentality. "I'm not sentimental," Chike replied, and surprised himself by smiling. "I am strategic, and strategy without soul is brittle. We are Nigerian. We are global. We don't have to choose." He tapped the screen, and a new deck appeared, one he had built alone in the sleepless hour before dawn. It wasn't a rejection, it was a redirection. He outlined a plan to fold cultural preservation into the company's core, not as charity, not as branding, but as infrastructure, digitization of endangered archives, distribution platforms for indigenous music, grants tied to STEM programs that taught algorithms alongside folklore. The room shifted from skepticism to discomfort, to a reluctant curiosity. He moved through revenue models that monetized authenticity without extracting it, licensing frameworks that favored creators, edge computing deployments in regional hubs that had been afterthoughts in previous expansions. "If we become merely efficient," he said, "we become replaceable. If we become necessary to the stories people tell themselves about who they are, we are irreplaceable." A rival opened his mouth to accuse him of idealism and closed it when the profit projections aligned unexpectedly with courage. Another asked where this vision came from. Chike glanced at the city and said, simply, "Home." Down the hall, Adaeze watched the live feed on a muted screen, one hand over her mouth. Pride rose and complicated everything, thick as honey. This was a man redrawing his map in public. He was bolder than the rumor of him, more tender than the legend allowed. Yet pride braided with unease, because vision can widen the sky while thinning the oxygen for those closest. Where would she stand when the lights brightened and the applause turned back to demands? She pressed her palm to the screen when his face softened at the word home, as if touch could steady a tide. The vote staggered, then righted itself. Amendments were proposed. Some stuck, others fell with clean thuds. The merger shifted from acquisition to alliance, from loudened profit to layered value. Deadlines moved, budgets recolored, KPIs reworded with verbs that sounded almost human. In private corners, a few directors hissed about risk. In the open, a slimmer majority nodded toward the future he described. The empire trembled, not collapsing, but recalibrating, a tower learning to breathe. Through it all, Chike's conviction did not crack. Where fear once hid behind presentation slides, a steadiness now stood, sourced from something older than the company. When the meeting adjourned, the air tasted new. Reporters waited, investors pinged, handshakes stacked. Chike deflected microphones with a practiced nod, then cut through the lobby, ignoring the congratulations that felt like traps. In the car, he finally exhaled, the kind of breath that empties a room inside the chest. Tola slid into the seat beside him, eyes bright with the alertness of people who live at the center of alarms. "You just walked a cliff's edge," she said, "and didn't fall." He smiled, brief and human. "Maybe the ground moved closer," he answered, and asked her to arrange a private setup at the mansion that evening. He reached home before dusk. The penthouse smelled faintly of cedar and citrus. The music box waited on the table as if it had been listening to the markets. Adaeze stood by the window, ready with a careful congrats and a cautious distance. He stopped, taking her in, not as relief, not as trophy, but as compass. "I changed the deal," he said, voice threaded with the fatigue of victory. "I changed myself." She nodded. "I saw." Neither moved. Outside, the light lowered. The city practiced its nightly miracle of continuing. "I owe you more than thanks," he said at last. "I owe you a future that knows its past." He reached into his jacket and placed a velvet case beside the music box, then closed it again, teasing the moment back from certainty. "Tonight, I want to show you something. Not a press release, not a promise I can break in a boardroom. A beginning." His fingers brushed the carving on the box as if greeting an ancestor. "It's tied to this," he added, and a rare boyishness brightened his face. The afterglow of a decision finally aligned with a heartbeat. The old Ikoyi mansion no longer groaned beneath vines and silence. Its marble bones had been polished, its chandeliers restored, its walls reborn in hues of cream and gold. Where once dust had draped despair, now light poured through arched windows, illuminating corridors alive with voices. The house had been remade not into a fortress of power but into a cultural center, an archive of memory and possibility. It was Chike's boldest project, unveiled on an evening that felt like history in motion. Outside, black cars lined the street, their drivers waiting while Lagos's finest slipped through the gates. Politicians, artists, investors, and scholars streamed into the mansion, guided by ushers dressed in crisp uniforms. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled, lenses tried to catch every angle of the night. The air carried the scent of polished wood, champagne, and expectation. At the very center of the great hall stood the music box, displayed in a glass case as though it were crown and scripture both. Its carvings gleamed under soft spotlights. When wound, it played continuously, the melody filling the air in gentle waves. Guests paused mid-conversation when the tune rose, as if something in it demanded reverence. They did not know its full story, but they sensed it was no ordinary relic. It was the heart of the house, the axis around which the evening turned. Chike walked through the crowd in a tailored midnight suit, his presence still commanding but no longer hard-edged. Tonight, he was not the ruthless CEO nor the feared dealmaker. He was a man introducing the world to his truest inheritance. At his side, Adaeze glowed in a gown of deep emerald silk, her hair swept back to reveal eyes alight with quiet pride. Many whispered about her, some with admiration, some with envy, but Chike paid them no mind. To him, she was the unspoken headline of the Chike Pay night. When he mounted the staircase to address the gathering, the music box's tune softened, almost as if listening. Chike's voice carried easily, confident yet unforced. This mansion was once abandoned, a monument to silence and loss. Tonight, it is alive again. Not as a palace of one family, but as a home for many. This center will preserve our stories through music, art, technology, and memory. It will be a place where our children see themselves not as shadows, but as legacies. Applause rose, genuine and sustained. He raised a hand, waiting for stillness, before he added, "We are more than numbers. More than contracts. We are culture. We are song. And tonight, we begin a new chapter, one where the past is not buried, but carried forward." Investors clapped with new respect. Academics nodded. Journalists scribbled furiously. Yet for all the approval filling the hall, Chike's eyes sought only Adaeze's. When he found her gaze, the rest of the room blurred. Later, when the speeches concluded and the guests busied themselves with cocktails and whispered deals, Chike slipped away from the crowd. He led Adaeze into the candlelit west wing, where the noise faded and the house seemed to breathe slower. Here, the portraits of his ancestors hung freshly restored, their eyes luminous in flickering light. The air smelled of wax and old wood. The music box, though faint, could still be heard, its melody threading through walls as if determined never to stop again. Chike turned to her, his expression softened into something only she ever saw. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For finding it. For finding me." Adaeze shook her head gently. "I didn't find you, Chike. You found yourself. I only carried a box." He reached for her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heartbeat thudded, steady but tender. "No," he said, voice rough with truth. "You carried me back to life." The confession dissolved the last of her fears. She had worried, for months, that his world would consume her, that his empire would demand more than love could give. But in his eyes now was not demand but devotion, not conquest but invitation. They stood close, silence folding around them. The melody drifted faintly, no longer sorrowful, now triumphant. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Chike placed his other hand at her waist. She did not resist. Under the watch of portraits and candlelight, they began to sway an improvised dance with no music but the box's endless tune. From the windows, Lagos spread in glowing constellations. The skyline pulsed, cranes blinked red, traffic hummed below like percussion. And in this candlelit hall, two figures moved slowly, not as billionaire and stranger, but as man and woman stitched by memory. Each step was a promise, each glance a vow. The music box no longer carried grief alone. It carried hope, renewal, the possibility of building without erasing. For Adaeze, it symbolized courage, the leap she had taken across worlds. For Chike, it was forgiveness, the song that returned him to the boy he had buried and the man he was meant to become. They danced until the melody cycled again, until time felt circular. He leaned close and whispered, "I no longer collapse when I hear it." His forehead touched hers, eyes closed. "Now, it makes me rise." Then let it play forever. And it did. The music filled the hall, spilled into corridors, and seeped into the night. Guests in the main hall paused, sensing something beyond wealth had taken root in the house. Reporters would later write about legacy and vision, investors about courage, scholars about preservation. But for those who heard the melody that night, it would be remembered as something simpler, the heartbeat of a family reborn. Generations later, the mansion would still stand, its doors open to music, its walls humming with stories. Visitors would pause by the glass case, in the center hall, listening to the box that never tired of its song. They would not know every detail of the man and woman who restored it, but they would feel it that here, love had once rewritten the destiny of an empire. The CEO no longer collapsed in tears. The music that once broke him now made him rise in love, in legacy, in forever. If this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly, share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. Hit that like button if you want more powerful billionaire dramas like this. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next story will be even more unforgettable. Let's grow this community of dreamers and storytellers together. Your support means everything.